Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Steve. Welcome to All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo.
We started this podcast to connect to Mad Men fans like us who pick up something new with every rewatch.
Be advised, this podcast will include spoilers, so we can talk about character arcs all the way through the final season of the series.
We're breaking down each episode of Mad Men, discussing the big and small moments, and posing questions to listeners so we can get your insights. Let's get started with Mad Men, C to Z. This is Season 1, Episode 8, The Hobo Code. It was written by Chris Provenzano and directed by Phil Abraham.
The episode opens with Pete and Peggy in the elevator heading into the office early at 7 a.m. As they get into the office, Peggy's come in early because she's got nerves and she's still working on the copy for the Belle Jolie ad campaign in addition to her regular work. Pete, on the other hand, just seems to be coming in because he's got nothing better to do and he's escaping his domestic situation.
So as they're in the elevator, Pete also reveals that this is the day that he and Trudy are moving into their new apartment. Instead of being excited about this, he finds reasons to be glum. He says he has to go supervise the movers during lunch, and he says he'll probably lose the rest of the day watching other people work, which might actually be what he does most of the time. As he's asking about Peggy, again, he never gives her credit for having any volition. So he says, Draper has you in early, and she says, oh, I'm so excited and nervous. He's so rude. At least he asks, but he says, what have you got to be nervous about? Like, there's nothing that Peggy could possibly have that would warrant any nervousness. And she says, Mr. Rumson is presenting my copy to the Belle Jolie people. So she's so excited, and she doesn't even get to present what she's written. It's constantly showing us how hard it is for Peggy to break into this world.
And Pete demonstrates it's always all about Pete. So he makes no effort to look through her eyes or, be in the moment with her and be supportive. He's just feeling sorry for himself.
He does take one moment because we'll call out, this is the second appearance of a thing like that. So when she says he's presenting my copy to the Belle Jolie people, we get a thing like that. So Pete pauses for just a moment to say, that's interesting. That's unexpected. And then he goes back to being glum and sad in his office.
Pete also takes a moment to chastise the elevator operator and complain about the fact that they have to share the elevator with some janitors or work personnel here early before the workday starts.
A little bit later, they still seem to be the only people around in the office. Peggy stops by to offer to get a cup of coffee, and Pete tells her to come in and close the door.
The scene quickly rolls into a passionate encounter between Pete and Peggy, and it's clear that they both have a lot of interest in each other, a lot of passion towards each other. Next thing you know, they have sex right there in Pete's office before anybody else is in the office. Although there is a funny bit at the end of the scene where the janitor can see them through the frosted window, silhouetted in the light on the sofa.
So this is a major, major spoiler. So if you are happening to be listening and you haven't seen the season, you should pause right here because we're really, really, really going to spoil right now. We know that this results in Peggy's pregnancy. And the last time we talked about this in the last episode about Peggy having the big cherry Danish, and you alluded to her pregnancy, which we know is coming. And in the director's commentary, he definitively says that Peggy is wearing stage 1 padding at this point, and Pete mentions that her skirt is tight as they're starting to have sex. And it was, in fact, their first encounter and not this encounter that caused the pregnancy. But I know there's this idea that she eats the Danish because she's pregnant, so she's feeling snacky. But I think it's really important that it shows she is a human being and her sexuality is part of her. And unlike Roger and Dawn and Pete, she doesn't just grab the next human who walks by. So when she has that encounter with Pete about the hunting story, she reaches for the Danish as a substitute. So I think she is shown to be this innocent, naive office worker, but she's more than a treat for a man when he feels like it. She has these desires too.
Afterwards, as they're putting themselves back together, Pete admits to Peggy, unsolicited, that he hadn't read her copy. And Peggy says that she's happy to hear that because she worried his silence meant he had read it and not liked it.
I feel like that's important because in Don's life, he's working a lot of the time, or the experiences that he has get poured into his work. And this is also true for Peggy. Her work identity is becoming more pronounced, even in a really personal moment like this.
I think it's also interesting from a Pete character standpoint. She isn't grilling him about her copy. He's basically confessing in a moment of honesty and owning up to not doing something that he had said he would do for her. So it's a very human moment for Pete. given how mopey and feeling sorry for himself he was just, a minute earlier in the prior scene.
And this honesty translates into a conversation he sort of starts and stops several times with Peggy, saying, I have all these things going on in my head and I can't say them. And she doesn't ask very much from him, but she does ask this. She says, do you think about me? And he's so smarmy. I'll be honest, a few times. So, I mean, any movie you would expect it to be like, yes, I think of you all the time. And he's like, a few times, maybe once in a while.
Well, and his selfishness kicks in again, too, because he starts talking about Trudy and how they're supposed to be one person, and he has all these things in his head, but Trudy's just another stranger. So here's Peggy trying to explore what is the connection between the two of them, and he's already flipped channel over to something that's front and center in his mind, in his world, which is Trudy.
And she offers a reassuring comment. She stands up and she says, Pete, you're not alone in this. And then she grabs a file to take out of the office because now more people are in there. So it will look like it's some kind of business thing. She smiles as she exits. Next up is our introduction to Lois Sadler, played by Krista Flanagan. She did Mad TV, The News Tank, and a lot more. She is in the operator room, but instead of connecting calls while the other two are working, she is listening to Sal speaking Italian to his mother. She's developed this crush on his voice. Joan stops by to bring the operator some food, and she asks what he looks like. And I love Joan's description. She's like, handsome, very debonair, cologne, not the cheap kind. Joan has a great way of bringing drama into the operator's room.
I like the way this scene as well underlines what we've already probably noticed as viewers about Sal. He's all put together, very handsome, definitely going to attract a lot of attention from the ladies. Although we have seen some glimpses and signs that perhaps Sal's orientation isn't what we might assume.
It's pretty obvious. I think I don't even feel like that is spoiling to anybody at this point. But Lois does not have a read on that. And interestingly, Joan doesn't seem to either. She's instantly ready to provide descriptive details about men in terms of their dating appeal, including Sal.
And what I would say as a viewer, too, my first time through, I didn't pick up on it until this episode. Watching for it now, of course, I see the signs and the warnings and things, but I would say even similar to Peggy's pregnancy, the first time through, I didn't catch it in this episode, from the slight bit of padding she's wearing or, the appetite in the prior episode. So my first time viewer self isn't aware of Sal's orientation at this moment.
So later that morning, Don comes in and he notices Peggy's ripped collar. And it's a small moment, but again, this is Mad Men's glory. She fibs and she says she caught it on something and she might start keeping a spare. Normally, she wouldn't say this to Don because Don doesn't need to know that. It's too much information. But this is so important for us because she thinks that this thing with Pete is a thing that will probably be happening more often when she says that. And she's so happy about this possibility, I think, that she's just sort of overflowing with possibilities about what her life is going to be like, even though he's married.
Yeah, agreed. Peggy is into Pete, for better or for worse.
Inexplicably.
And we just have to accept that, no matter what we think about Pete. The next scene is Don called into Cooper's office. We see him waiting outside in his stocking feet because you can't wear shoes in Cooper's office. He goes into the office and is presented with a $2,500 bonus check where Cooper tells him that he's monetized Don's value and contribution and he wants to reward him.
We know Pete's not good at math, but he makes $3,900 a year, so this is a sizable bonus check for Don.
It's interesting, too, that Cooper asks Don if he's read Atlas Shrugged. They get into a little discussion about that. Atlas Shrugged, of course, by Ayn Rand, the philosophy of objectivism, a rationalization of selfishness, and the idea that altruism is a diversion of us from our individual focus on our own betterment, and that we don't have obligations to societies or collectives, that it's all about the individual. Bert makes several comments to Don that he's very similar to him, and thus Bert feels he understands Don and knows that Don will want this bonus check, as a representation of Don's contribution and recognition. Don admits he hasn't read the novel and tells Bert that he'll get right on it.
This whole Ayn Rand philosophy seems like quite an excuse for Don to run around and do what he likes, which he's doing anyway. Bert, you don't need to feed the beast here. He probably does not need to read this book at this point in his life. Another interesting thing in this exchange is that Bert says, when you hit 40, you've met or seen every type of person there is. And I think I know what type of person you are. And of course, the whole theme of season 1 and possibly the series being who is Don Draper. This is an interesting assertion on Bert's part.
It's interesting, too, because Bert summarizes what he thinks it means to say that Bert and Don are similar people: productive and reasonable, completely self-interested, unsentimental about those who depend on their hard work. Is Bert talking about the firm? Is he talking about family? Is it all of the above?
It is an interesting glimpse into who Bert Cooper is. Moving on, we get to a sign on the door that says, "This is the art department, not casting." And it's written in marker, which is sort of funny. This is the mistake that happens all the time. And we see Lois stopping by the art department with a very flimsy excuse to meet Sal just so that she can talk to him. In a not so subtle moment, she's talking with the two guys in the art department who are already there, one of whom is Dwayne, played by Barry Livingston. He has done a ton of TV work, but he was also Ernie on My Three Sons way, way back. Lois has this moment where she says, "Well, I work in a closet all day," which with Sal showing up being a closeted gay man is not too subtle.
In the director's commentary, he mentions this is really the episode where Sal comes into full focus as a character for us. And I think this scene contributes very much to that picture. Sal knows how to behave. It's pretty clear that Lois is very interested in him. Dwayne and Marty are envious of the attention. And it's just a interesting dynamic here as we see Lois flirting with the closeted gay man, and then the envy of the nerdy arts coworkers who don't get any attention from Lois at all.
They blame it on the fact that he makes money, and Sal says, "I told you, you don't need money to dress better than you do, Dwayne."
Which is just another snooty shot or rib from Sal. We've seen a few of them, such as back at Pete when he was told to put his things in a cardboard box, and Sal said something to the effect of, "You picked the wrong week to buy an apartment." Sal's got a biting edge to him when he wants to.
In a funny little detail, Lois repeats what she heard Sal say to his mother through the switchboard. She says, "Ciao, ciao," and gives him a look. It's very, very clear about her intentions.
In the next scene, we have Pete in his office as Trudy arrives. Pete seems glum and unhappy, but he puts on a happy face to greet her. As she comes in and brings champagne, Pete gets irritated, expresses his frustration. "This is my office. How do you think it looks?" Trudy is crushed by this, and our hatred of Pete moves to another level, seeing him as how he shuts down his new wife on her happy day as they're moving into their new apartment.
He's such a faker because he's sitting at his desk with his feet up drinking, and the secretary buzzes him saying, "I have her." And he's like, "Light up a line, would you?" And the secretary says, "No, she's actually here." He stores his drink in the desk, swings his legs off because his whole appearance needs to be about how hard he's working and how he really can't get away from his very busy job, when in fact he is just sitting there literally doing nothing.
It is funny how it almost reminds me of something like, say, American Psycho, where we never understand exactly what Patrick Bateman's job is. We see Pete, the account man, just staring out the window or having a drink. Phil Abraham, the director, mentions that this, is a scene that sort of shows Pete as this kind of Don Jr. wannabe. And I think it fits. And I totally agree with you. It's even more unfair and cruel of him to act as if he's so busy and Trudy's interrupting something, because she really isn't. And then I love the acting in the scene here, because the crushed look on Trudy's face and the hurt, going from this high and thrilled to see her husband to the rejection, it's really heartbreaking. And I think it's the actress that pulls it off in the scene.
And she's different from Betty. She pushes back. She's brought her bottle of champagne. Pete can't bring her down. She says, "We could even walk." Then everything he says is a no. "It's 30 blocks. It's beautiful outside. I have a busier day than I thought." "Okay, well, let's have champagne here." Everything she offers and suggests is a no until she gets to that place of hurt, and then she confronts him on it. Betty would not do that to Don. She would just say, "Okay," and then smile and make the best of it. I appreciate that Trudy actually pushes back. She wants to get to a mutual win here. She's not trying to have triumph. But when she sits down on the couch and he's just had sex on it with Peggy and he flips a cushion over, this really undoes him. He's flustered and doesn't even know how to handle it. But he still blames her. "See what happens when you just show up like this? We fight." Because somehow it's Trudy's fault. What?
It really does seem that Pete has so much self-loathing that it just overflows, and then he projects it onto others like Trudy. I also enjoyed the touch at the end of the scene where they're both the product of good breeding. So they realize they've got to pull it back here and recover it. So Pete apologizes, suggests they open the champagne. Trudy graciously accepts. I like the writing here because it shows their upbringing, that they know how to behave politely and move past this, even though it's been a rather devastating hit that's just occurred.
And she apologizes to him too for showing up. And she says, I'm sorry, we're going to live there a long time. There's no point in being superstitious, even though he literally has just cheated on her this morning. So maybe a little stitious.
We move into the boardroom where Freddie is presenting to the Belle Jolie people. He goes through the pitch, which, we're familiar of from, the scenes with Peggy with the basket of kisses. The woman picks her color, marks her man. The younger client instantly likes it. The older guy doesn't. And he sort of reverts back to the starting place where they had gone with the ad campaign, saying that, women want a lot of selection. And again, it's this example of the men think they know what the women want, which has been disproven. And they've actually got this great campaign suggested, but it's another sexist man who thinks he knows better.
And Don, in a very interesting turn, says, okay, thanks for your time. They all seem to be startled by this. And he says, why should we waste time on kabuki? And the guy goes, I don't know what that means. And then he gets snippy. You've enlisted my expertise. You want to keep going the way you have. And the client quite rightly says, I don't think you can refocus the core of my business. And then he makes the sale. And his sale uses Peggy's language. She's unique. She makes the choices. She's chosen him. You've given every girl that wears your lipstick the gift of total ownership. Don speaking so aggressively for the female point of view is ironic, surprising, interesting that he is able to so clearly interpret this need, even though he doesn't live by it.
And it's not said in the scene or by the characters, but I think both Freddie and Dawn are well aware that this window, this portal into the female mindset, has come from Peggy's insights. And it's given them this weapon now to wield against this hesitant older client who wants to go back to a tired well that isn't working. I think Dawn mentions Belle Jolie is in fourth place and obviously needs a change. Dawn carries the day with the force of his argument and his presence. I think this really marks a scene where we see the genius of Dawn in making the pitch and making the sale to the client and carrying it through resistance, which at the point where he stands up, you think that he's being petulant again and potentially walking out of the boardroom.
We don't get to see all the moments, but they did win the client, and it cuts to them exiting and laughing together. And Ken is talking with them about managing their time in New York, because as the account man, that's part of his job, is to make sure that everything about the experience is positive, including their entertainment. One of the clients says that he ran into Robert Mitchum at the restaurant he went to the night before, and they're all having a conversation about the opportunities in New York City.
Yeah, it's clear that the razzle-dazzle of Manhattan is part of the pitch and the benefit of going to see your Madison Avenue ad agency. Both gentlemen on the client side are very interested in going out and carousing that evening, although as we'll see, they don't carouse together.
After the clients leave, the men all proceed to Don's office. They're laughing, they're talking. They pass Peggy without a look or a word. And the buzzer rings and Don says, Peggy, ice. She walks in with it and he asks, how do you take it? And Fred says, home run, ballerina. Don says, go ahead before Miss Holloway sees to invite her to take a drink. Sal critiques her when she takes a sip and he says, you call that celebrating? So she downs it. And she's really proud. She's looking at the poster and she said, oh, I thought it was going to say the mark you make on your man. And Freddie goes, you might be a writer, honey, because you're arrogant. They ask, do you want another drink? And she goes, oh, I don't know. And then they go, you're not a writer.
I really love this scene for a number of reasons, but I think the piece I like the best about it is I think there's a real truth here about prejudice and barriers for different people at different times. They realize that Peggy unlocked this account and won the day for them with her idea, and they're going to give her credit for it. But they do go through that little pantomime at the start where they go in and close the door. She gets no feedback. She's on pins and needles. They know she's waiting to see how it went. And then they bring her into the room with the ice. And then instantly she goes from being on the outside looking in to on the inside looking out. And it feels very genuine to me too. It's not sort of, oh, we have this obligation to invite her in. it's a sense of you hit the ball over the fence. You're now one of us and congratulating and celebrating on it. And what I like about that is I think so much of prejudice and attitudes and beliefs are inconsistent or susceptible to being cracked or disrupted with various events. And you'd think if they were so heartfelt and true, they would be consistent and could weather through sort of contradictory evidence or things that would throw them. To me, this is just a beautifully written scene where we see just how inconsistent and flimsy, and it's a curtain. And once you're through the curtain, you're through to the other side, and you realize the barrier is really nothing more than something in your head. I do appreciate that they're honest enough to admit that Peggy is the reason they won this and to celebrate it with her.
She's still not an equal and she still is an outsider, but she's included a little bit more here. And Sal, again, has another snippy moment. She's staring at the artwork. She loves it so much. And she says, "Can I keep it?" And Sal goes, no. Like it would be no cost to him to say yes, and it would mean everything to her. But he's going to deny her because he can't.
It does feel like a little power play from Sal, and the art department is his. It's their art. So I like that writing too. I think it fits as we get to know and understand Sal.
And she's still thrilled. She's still so happy. In the next scene, she's talking to the telephone operators in the break room. And she says, "My Belle Jolie copy, they loved it. They poured me a drink." And Joan overhears her. And so Peggy starts modifying and she says, "Oh, I shouldn't be bragging." But I have to say that Joan smiles. She's not exactly proud, but she seems a little happy to see Peggy happy.
And I think this reinforces Joan and Peggy are not jealous of each other. They're in different circles with different objectives, different takes. So there can be friction and cattiness between the two of them, but they're not in direct competition. And I think sometimes as a viewer, I default to assuming they must be, and they really aren't. And I think the writing makes that clear again and again.
And just like Peggy fit in a little bit more with the writers, she's also fitting in a little bit more with the other office staff, too. The telephone operators are saying, "Oh, that's great. We should go celebrate. How about if we go to PJ Clark's today?" Which will become important in some later scenes. But it also shows how Peggy is fitting in. She's not the new girl anymore. She's making friends. People are happy to celebrate with her. Not just Joan's semi approval. She has real, genuine friendships developing here in the office, which is nice to see for Peggy.
And Peggy also makes a point of inviting Pete, who begs off, saying he probably needs to go home. Peggy suggests he come at 3 o'clock so he can be there a couple hours and then still get home at 5 p.m.
I like this moment that Pete says, "I should go home. I'm kind of senior ranking when those other men are gone." Sad Pete. This is assistant to the regional manager, sad Pete. When Peggy comes in, of course, she just wants Pete to go out to PJ Clark's with them. But Ken takes a minute to explicitly say congratulations to Peggy. So this is a good guy moment for Ken, too. And finally, Pete agrees to go. And Peggy takes a skip in the hall as she walks away. It isn't just her copy, it's that Pete's coming to celebrate. So everything about this day is coming together for her.
We roll from there to Lois putting a fake call through so she has an excuse to talk to Sal. Sal's a smart guy. He can tell that that's exactly what's going on. Lois talks about Peggy saying Sal's artwork was spectacular and then moves from the flattery over to inviting Sal to join them all at PJ Clark's.
He says he'll be there, but he hangs up the phone like he knows he's got a problem.
The next scene takes us to the village where Dawn shows up at Midge's apartment. As the door opens, we don't see Midge, we see a hippie in a fez. Roy is also there and says that it's the ad man, alluding to Dawn. Dawn makes a point of coming in and giving Midge a great big kiss, tells her to pack her bags, they're going to Paris, and flashes her the bonus check.
We have no reason to think that Don has ever been to Paris himself either. And Midge, instead of being excited about this opportunity, says she wants to stay in the apartment with her friends, getting high and listening to jazz. That's her plan.
And Dawn is dismissive of this plan, and I have to admit I side with Dawn here. You can run away to Paris at no expense or sit around listening to Miles Davis with your hippie friends and get high. But that's Midge's decision, and she carries the day, and Dawn is forced to cool his jets a while before he tries to lure her to take a trip to Paris with him.
I get the sense this is Don's first time getting high. Is that your take?
I think it could be, yeah. I guess I didn't give much thought about it one way or the other. It's clearly not something that he wants to indulge in, which, again, I like the writing because it's so true at this time, alcoholics dismissing marijuana, as a substance you shouldn't abuse. It's kind of ironic.
And Midge asks, "Do you like it?" I don't know where else Don would run into it, so I have to assume that if he hasn't smoked with Midge, this is probably his first go. And he says, "I feel like Dorothy. Everything just turned to color." And Roy, ever eloquent, says, "The words, man. You are good with the words." And Don goes, "Well put."
I love the hippies. I really love Roy. And we got some other good lines as we roll through.
All Midge's friends are curious about him. So the women are thinking he's really hot and they'll take care of him. The men think he's square. Even when they're letting him in, it's like, oh, he's all right. And you can see this counterculture bit where Don represents authority. It's funny that he's seen as such an outsider to this group where Peggy was the outsider before.
I think that's true, but the vibe I get more strongly is Don is sexual competition. He's coming in offering to fly Midge to Paris. They don't have two nickels to rub together. Like, they're going to get high in the apartment and listen to a record because they don't have any money. They really don't have any other options. Don opens up an entire other world. So the vibe I always got, and not that they don't think he's square in the establishment, there's some good repartee between them later in the episode. I always felt that the friction is primarily for the attentions of Midge.
Oh, I agree. That's really what it is. But I think it also has to do with identity. And I think, as we'll see in just a minute here, I think Don chafes a little bit at representing authority. He likes to be the creative freedom of expression guy. And here they're accusing him of being in a box. Don doesn't like that ever.
Another part that chafes Don is they believe Don is a creature of privilege. And they have no sense, and Midge doesn't either, of Don's rough background. And he's a whore child and he's come from nothing. So they think he's a Roger or a Pete, someone born to this and always enjoyed it, when really he has much more in common with them than they would ever imagine.
That expression, "poor child," which we're coming up to this scene, it's such an ugly self-description. The idea that this is how this child sees himself, that's the name he gives himself. Of all the names that Don Draper chooses and all the identities, the fact that he carried that one as a young child is so painful.
It's heartbreaking to hear a boy describe himself in that way. Yeah, it really is. And it, I think, is just another great bit of writing to indicate where does that come from, this awful environment in which he's being raised.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So the transition from Midge's hippie friends is the end of the record player sound to the sound of him stepping on a shovel as a child in a flashback.
And in the flashback, we could see Dick working to, looks like maybe dig a fence post hole, and a hobo comes up and basically talks his way into being able to spend the night on the farm and get a meal. Dick's stepmom barks at him to stop digging the hole and go get some wood to build a fire. But again, we can see the unfairness of this because Dick was likely doing exactly what he was instructed, but suddenly there's a new instruction, and then she's holding it against him and calling him out for not reading her mind as to what the new task is he should get busy with.
I don't know. I kind of thought he was digging holes for fun because it didn't look like they were purposeful, but maybe I missed that.
No one on that farm is doing anything for fun, especially not Dick.
The hobo who stops by is played by Paul Schultz. He was in Suits and 24, and he was also the priest that Carmela talks to in The Sopranos. We get our truth call out for this episode from Abigail Whitman. The hobo is asking for some food or some work. Archie says, "We're not Christians here no more." And Abigail says, "That is not true." Her religion seems really important to her, but not to Archie and not to Don. We haven't seen their family go to church or any evidence of religion in his life.
And even in terms of her behavior, I can't see any trace of what I would describe as classic Christian values or behaviors. So it seems a label she's attached to herself, but as you point out, likely without much tangible meaning or benefit for Dick's existence.
She does move the lever on the hobo being able to come in and get some food, and they're sitting together having lunch. And Mrs. Whitman shows contempt for the hobo being a hobo. Archie's contempt seems more about him being from New York and not being able to identify a weed. The hobo's language is fancier than theirs, and I wonder if Dick inherited this contempt for fancy people and then he became one.
Yeah, I don't know, but I totally agree with you that there's a sense of almost a feeling of superiority from the stepmom and Dick's father. That obviously this more well-heeled, sort of better brought up person has now been laid low and is the hobo seeking a seat at their table and to eat their food and sleep in their barn. And that's a moment they're not unwilling to savor and enjoy a little bit, even as they're ostensibly offering some charity and support for the individual.
And she corrects Archie. She says nobody takes to charity easy. She also has this comment about how communists are souls, but they can't be saved. And in our second truth call out, the hobo answers, that's true. It doesn't seem that he has a strong opinion on this, but she clearly does. So he's just agreeing. And she gives this quote from her mother. She says, my mama always said life is like a horseshoe, fat in the middle, open on both ends, and hard all the way through. But she gets up and gives him a coin when they don't have very much. And it's Archie who takes it tomorrow, he says, after you've done some work. And the gap between Don Draper, who gets a $2,500 bonus check out of the blue from his boss, and Dick Whitman, who's watching two men competing for a quarter, that's pretty staggering.
It is, and I interpreted the hobo's comments at the table in the same way as director Phil Abraham said in his commentary. Was just, the hobo is very agreeable and not looking to get into an argument with anybody because he's got a dinner, a place to sleep, and then potentially earning a quarter at stake. So he's going to agree with whatever the two of them say.
We move into a scene set at the Roosevelt Hotel, which the client was mentioning. Sal has decided to visit this place, and who should he run into but Elliot, one of the Belle Jolie people? They seem to be having this good conversation, and we learn a lot more about Sal here. He's appreciating the architecture, so his art isn't just a job for him, it's how he views the world. And the Belle Jolie guy says there's something about New York that's exciting. There's building after building, little compartments filled with possibilities. And Sal says, is that from 42nd Street, the musical? And he admits that he takes this city for granted. He's humble here in a way that he isn't with anybody else he works with in the office. So this is a different, softer side of Sal.
I really like the acting here, and I really like the writing because it seems to be right on that cusp of it's a little flirty, but not blatantly so. So it leaves that room for doubt there. And I think the characters play with that doubt and that boundary and sort of dance along it in a way that it's really interesting as a viewer to speculate as to what's going on in their heads and who's going to take the next move to try and advance things into clarity.
The scene cuts to PJ Clark's. This is the thing that we've been building up to all day, the celebration for Peggy's copy being so well accepted by the client. We hear this song called the Choo Choo Train Cha Cha by the Rinky Dinks. It was released in 1959. We see Peggy dancing with Freddie, and it's kind of a formal, old-fashioned kind of a cha-cha. They seem to be having fun, but it's very friendly and appropriate. As the song ends, we can see him spilling his drink on her accidentally. And this alludes to what everybody in the office knows, that Freddie has a drinking problem.
It's a nice scene where we see everyone celebrating, and I think the focal point is Peggy. She's clearly glowing. She's so happy. She's had this huge success. It's everything she wanted. All her coworkers are here and they're celebrating it together.
We also get to see Lois, and she's looking around for Sal, who said he was going to show and he didn't. Joan and Lois have this very small scene that is so great because it's people talking past each other. So Joan is saying, I'm not saying Peggy doesn't have something upstairs, but it's Sterling Cooper. Usually things are happening downstairs. It goes back to our earlier point about Joan being a little perplexed by Peggy in a way that's different from jealousy. Joan doesn't want to be a copywriter, but she's surprised that this many people would go out to a bar with the excuse that they're celebrating copywriting. Lois, at the same time, Joan is saying, I can't believe that the whole office seems to have turned up here in response to something Peggy did. And Lois is just focused on the fact that Sal isn't here. And she's like, I don't see the art department. Paul wordlessly invites Joan to dance, and she accepts that, and they're familiar with each other. It shows by how they move. They don't even say anything. We also have a moment here where Hildy and Harry are dancing together. Pete is watching this happen, and there are a lot of personal dynamics happening in a very short space of time in this scene.
I really like your observation about Joan because I think what it shows us is Peggy is something strange and new to Joan's world. She's never seen a person like Peggy come into the office never seen a woman with the aspirations that Peggy has. So Peggy is basically this strange animal for Joan, and Joan's getting her head around it and trying to figure out what this means and where it's headed. I love the way the writing highlights that fact again, that it's not just a straight traditional same old for Joan, that Peggy's a new species in the forest.
Chubby Checkers, The Twist, which was released in 1958, comes on, and a lot of the women jump up and down and squeal, and Peggy does too, and we really don't get to see that much about her. So she might not be the most current, but at least she's aware of this popular song and she's excited, and her eye catches Pete.
She catches Pete from across the room. She seductively twists over to him. As she gets up to him, he's got a somber, glum look on his face, and he says to her, "I don't like you like this." And it is crushing.
It's terrible because she invites him. She says, "Dance with me." And you would think after this morning that she has earned the right to at least invite him to have a dance in public with everybody here. This is not an unreasonable ask. And he finds a way to say no, the worst possible way to say no.
If you didn't hate Pete until this moment, you certainly do now. Very similar to the way he shuts down Trudy and devastates her. He just destroys Peggy here. And I have to call out Elizabeth Moss's acting in this scene. I think it's really her at her best. And the way she holds it together, but you can tell she's just been crushed and she's fighting back the tears amidst all this joy and relaxation around her. I think she just owns the scene and is magnificent.
And he does too. He says, "I don't like you like this." And he won't relent. He just stares at her. He doesn't apologize for this awful thing he's saying. The idea that she's an independent person with things to celebrate instead of, I guess, a jewel he can keep in a drawer and take out whenever he wants is problematic. She goes back to the dance floor. She's twisting absently. She's trying to pretend like she's having fun and smiling. She's brushing away a tear. It's not just this current rejection. This is a disappointment that this is not going to be a relationship like she hoped. It could never work out. He's married, but I think this is the moment that she knows he's not for her. She was celebrating her work. He's not here for it. He's not hers. He's too selfish and controlling. Again, I don't really understand what she saw in him in the first place, but this rejection feels like a hard cut point.
I wonder what Pete means when he says, "I don't like you like this." Does he mean her success, her independence from him? Or is it even more petty, where it's just simply Pete is such a child and so self obsessed? Not only can he not enjoy and savor somebody else's success, it all has to be reflected into his own aspirations and failures and strikes at that insecurity in him.
And she's glowing with happiness. So to say, "I don't like you like this," it's crushing. It's so terrible. And I think it's a mixture of all of the above, and it doesn't even have to be defined really because whatever it is he doesn't like about it, it's not a recipe for success. She can't pretend anymore that this is something she can indulge. It has to end. And what a difference from this morning when she believed in it and was excited about it. And now in a time when she has been so happy professionally to have this personal cut. And again, I mean, he's a married man and she knows that. It's not that that was a relationship that was ever going to be built on a strong foundation of mutual respect or something, but it really, really is crystal clear to her, I think, that she can't believe in this ever again.
Maybe if they have a baby together or something, it could fix it.
That also does not sound like a recipe for success.
We move into the next scene, which is Sal and Elliot's at the restaurant. This discussion continues more of the walking that boundary line of flirting, but then Elliot takes it across the line and says he's got a great view from his hotel room, and Sal really should come over and see it. At that point, it becomes very clear what Elliot is inviting Sal to do.
But it feels like a very good conversation between equals. And Sal confesses something to Elliot that we did not know about him. He says something like, "What do you want to do?" And he says, "Oh, I'd like to break off with one of the writers where the copy follows art, not the other way around." We see that that must be a daily frustration in his work life. And he asks him, "Are you happy?" And this is a really deep, meaningful conversation for somebody you've just met. It seems really full of potential. When Elliot brings the invitation into the forefront and brushes his fingers as he takes his glass, he says, "No, I have thought about it. I know what I want to do. Elliot says, I know what you're thinking. I'll show you. And Sal shakes his head. He's wordless and he's staring into his eyes. And you can see, I don't know if I can compare it to Peggy accurately, but you can see he wants something that he shouldn't want, he thinks. At the same time, he can't let himself. So there's this tension here between who am I pretending to be and who do I want to be?
I love the writing and the acting in this scene, and I think Elliot calls it correctly when he says, "What are you afraid of?" And the answer is everything, because everything's at stake here. By calling out that fear, I think that's an essential part of Sal's hesitation here. The other thing I wanted to just go back to is they do a toast to health, wealth, and happiness. And Sal says, well, it's kind of redundant because if you have health and wealth, then you must have happiness. But that's the irony, isn't it? That Sal has health and wealth, but he doesn't have happiness. And that's pretty clear from this conversation and where it ends up as Sal is stuck between his desire and his fear holding him back.
He definitively says no. He gets up from the table. He shakes his hand, pretending that it was, in fact, just a business dinner. It feels like this could be the start of a really good relationship, but it's over before it begins.
I love the writing here because we've learned so much about Sal with relatively little screen time, yet they've fully fleshed out this character that we had some glimpses of up to this point. But from this moment forward, we know so much more about Sal, who he is, and what his possibilities might look like going forward.
And where it seemed like, oh, maybe you're just being a jerk to lead Lois on, you see this bit of his life now, and you feel more tenderness to Sal in spite of all the quips and hurtful digs that he's slinging at other people on a regular basis. You cannot help but feel a lot of empathy for him as you get to know him a little bit more, even in a short space of time.
Absolutely. And in keeping with the themes of prejudice and barriers and obstacles for characters, we can add Sal to that list now, realizing he faces some very, very high barriers.
We cut to a short scene at Midge's apartment. Don has found a giant Polaroid camera, has started taking some pictures, and Midge is posing. Midge's friends are sitting around getting high and they're arguing about ideas, which is also what Don does at his day job. He seems a little put out that they aren't working or accomplishing anything. Suddenly, the cops show up outside. Judd says, oh man, I was going to trek down for some carrot juice. Now he can't go down because the cops are outside.
I like the presence of the Polaroid too, because it's obvious that Midge can't afford a Polaroid camera. This is a gift from one of her paramours. Just like the television that got thrown out the window, she's got this high-tech Instamatic camera.
We move quickly to another flashback. This is Dick Whitman coming to the hobo to say, I'm supposed to tell you to say your prayers. And he says, praying won't help you from this place, kid. In spite of all his talk about moving forward, Don Draper's past is pulling at him. This conversation that they have about moving forward or leaving and freedom, this is at the heart of Don Draper's life today. In episode 3, when Don left Sally's birthday party to get the cake and never brought the cake back, Don is sitting at the train tracks, and that feels like a symbol of a fork in the road to go home or move on. But with this episode, we see this formative core memory of the stranger, this hobo coming through, who seems more content than any other adult in Dick Whitman's life. And he says he left a wife and a job and family. He just walked away, and now he goes where he pleases. And this is a real life that's fulfilling.
I'd also say that the hobo treats Dick kindly. He's polite to them. He says some compliments to him. He's willing to share his philosophy. To this point in Dick's childhood that we've seen, we have no evidence of him ever being treated by an adult in this way. So I've got to think that holds a big appeal for a young boy who's miserable and suffering to see that there are other adults who don't act that way. As the hobo talks about this freedom, it gives Dick hope that there's a world out there. You can escape this. You're not going to be trapped here forever. And I wonder if, from Dick's perspective, it's very difficult to imagine that. But here you have someone in a position of, ironic to us as adults, but a hobo is someone in a position of authority or of vision to tell Dick what's over the fence he can't see over right now. I think that's what makes it so profound in that character's evolution. He's now handed him a lottery ticket or a potential map out of his circumstances.
And I wonder about this statement. The hobo says, don't be scared, kid. You ain't a man yet. And I don't know what it means. Maybe it means he still has a choice to be something other than what this place is carving him out to be. Or maybe it's Don in this flashback realizing he is scared. He's still more like a kid than a man. And maybe he'll always be waiting to be a real man. And maybe the scary thing is not to ever get there.
I'm with you. I wonder a little bit what it meant. I was thinking what he's saying is right now in Dick's life, Dick is trapped and the choices are being made for him. So Dick shouldn't feel scared or own that situation. It's been imposed upon him. The real fear, the real challenge will be in the future when he's free to do whatever he wants. And then all that responsibility is going to fall on his head. And freedom's not going to seem like just a gain with no downsides. Freedom's going to come with some real costs and consequences in a way that his lack of freedom today doesn't entail that.
Yes, that makes sense. We cut back to Don looking at Polaroids. He's smoking and he smiles, kind of resigned. He says, "Of course." He looks at Roy and Midge and he says, "You too, you're in love." And they both deny. It's bourgeois. It's ridiculous. She shoves the picture aside. This is not who she wants to be.
And I love when Don says, "I know what love looks like," referencing his profession and the fabrication or the pitching of love, because he's been so disparaging. And when he was talking to Rachel about how it doesn't really exist, it's a fabrication, it's ironic now that he almost seems to be taking the opposite approach or position, that it does exist and he's captured it on the film.
Judd, one of Midge's friends, is mostly taking digs at Don until he finally just says, "My God, stop talking. Make something of yourself." And that certainly has echoes of Abigail Whitman's philosophy. Make something of yourself, go work, go do something. And Roy says, "You invent want," which of course can be applied to advertising. But Don is also supremely unhappy with whatever he has. He's like the poster boy of constantly inventing new wants for himself. Then Don says, "There is no big lie. The universe is indifferent," which again sounds like Abigail's mother saying that life is like a horseshoe. It's hard all the way through. And Judd, who's again completely high, has this great response. He goes, "Man, why'd you have to say that?" I don't know about you, but on that point, I definitely agreed with him. It was kind of a dark take.
I like the juxtaposition of the hippies with Don's philosophy, because I think you're right. They're each unhappy, but they've arrived at different root causes to the unhappiness. So for the hippies, there's a big lie. It's this system, it's the man oppressing them. If they could get out from under it, then they'd be in this free, happy state and everything would be better. Don's view is much more cynical and hard boiled because he doesn't have the conspiracy theory or the explanation of the man holding him down. He says it's just a lack of system. The universe is indifferent, which gets back, I think, to Bert's conversation about individualism and selfishness and getting yours.
Yeah, Bert is kind of a dark mentor if you accept him as your Yoda. The universe isn't different is a hard thing to work forward, you know?
Don goes back to Midge now and he says, "Let's go." And it's clear it's a take it or leave it situation about going to Paris on the bonus check. Midge rejects him again and says that she can't go. Don signs the check over to her.
He's already established that Midge and Roy seem to be in love with each other, even though they're denying it. And he still kind of tries to command her to go to Paris. But this brings us to this episode's double dip question for our listeners. Why doesn't Midge say yes to Paris? And why does Don give her his whole bonus check? It does not seem very Ayn Rand of him, if I may say so. You can visit us at www.madmenctozee.com and look for episode 8 for our double dip question. Why doesn't Midge say yes to Paris? And why does Don give her the whole check? I have some wonderings about this.
I do as well. I love as the scene wraps up and Don gets his hat and goes to go out the door. And one of Midge's friends says, "You can't go out there," because the cops are out there and obviously rousting people down in the village who look counterculture. And Don looks at him and says, "You can't," making it clear Don's in his suit. He's a respectable businessman, a professional from Madison Avenue, and the cops pose no threat to Don whatsoever. And then he walks out the door and we see him moving past the cops who nod the head and give him a respectful passage through their ranks.
Don finally goes home. It's late, it's dark, and he comes in to Bobby, his son, sleeping in bed. And Don Don sits on his bed and strokes his hair and says, "Wake up, Bobby." He invites him to ask him any question. And you see here, Don wants to be a better kind of father than he had. And Bobby is just like, "I'm sleepy." And he's like, "Ask me. You can ask me anything." And he asks, "Why do lightning bugs light up?" And Don doesn't know. But he says, "I'll never lie to you." He wants to commit to being an honest man, at least to his kid, at least in that moment. But also, I think he wants to be able to run away all the time, even more.
I think it goes back to you don't have to be afraid you're not an adult. This is the terror of Dawn's life. What do you do with your freedom? What do your choices require of you? What are the implications and consequences? And I think he really struggles with that.
And we see more about why in the next scene in our flashback where Archie Whitman goes back on his word to the hobo. The hobo's done all his work. He says, "I'll be on my way. Thank you again." And Archie fiddles in his pocket, but it's for his lighter, not the coin. He sends him on his way. He pockets the quarter Abigail put on the table to give to the hobo. The hobo's done the work. Archie is not meeting the agreement.
I think it's very on brand for Archie. And I think it's another example for young Dick Whitman that life isn't fair, people are selfish, the world doesn't owe you anything, commitments won't be kept. And I think it really reinforces the lessons that he's learned to this point in his life and further reinforces the message of the hobo that freedom awaits you. You won't be hostage or captive to these types of treatments or people.
The hobo moves away, and young Dick Whitman runs after him and looks at their gatepost, and he sees the dishonest man marking there. And he looks back at his father, and I wonder if he's disgusted with his father and determined not to be like him, or curious to discover this about him, or maybe he just sees this as a way of being. Is it something to get away from, or is it something that just is? Maybe he's a soul that can't be saved.
I think it's also potentially liberating to Dick Whitman. When you're young and you're trying to figure things out, what you're familiar with is it seems like the norm and you accept it as that's the way it is in the world. And it can be difficult to perceive that there are many other potential outcomes or realities. Having the label of the dishonest man, I think allows Dick to categorize Archie in a way that if there are dishonest men, potentially there are also honest men out there and on alternatives. And he's now got a label to attach and a category assigned for Archie. Before this outside influence, perhaps this is just all he knows. The other point I'd like to call out is from the director commentary where Phil Abraham says that it's an old mark of a dishonest man. So it's not fresh cut by the hobo last night. It's there when the hobo walks onto the property. So when the hobo's talking with Dick that evening, he would have probably already seen the mark and been expecting a questionable or shady interaction at this house.
Next, we see Don sleeping next to Bobby in his bed, and we cut to the clock at 7:10 at Don's house, and then we move into the office, which is a really nice framing because, of course, the episode opened with Peggy coming in early. She sees, as she comes into the office, that Pete's door is ajar, and she doesn't knock and she doesn't say hi or anything. She walks to her desk. She was looking forward to being the kind of person who keeps a spare blouse in her drawer after liaisons with Pete, and she hesitates in front of his door, but then she doesn't knock or say anything. So was she going to get closure? Did she still hope something was going to happen between them? When he walks into his office later, he doesn't look back at her.
My impression as she looks hopefully towards Pete, trying to make that eye contact as he comes in the morning, suggests that she is still interested in Pete at that point and looking to have a positive interaction after the awful one from the prior evening. It doesn't happen. She's got to press on with her day. And to me, it alludes again to Peggy's inner strength here that, she's got to make her way and fight for what she's going to have in this world. She's looking for partnership. She's looking for companionship. Pete seems to run a little hot and cold.
The typing sound and the ringing of the phones increase, and the episode closes with a shot of Donald Draper, the name on the door, a dishonest man's name. And the question remains whether he will change his dishonest man's mark or not. The closing song, Gimme That Old Time Religion, is jarringly different from this sleek, stylish Manhattan atmosphere. In a very dark interpretation, maybe that old time religion is being a dishonest man, versus repeat and they say, give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me. Maybe dishonesty is good enough for him. Maybe that's too literal an interpretation of it. How did you feel about this episode compared to the other one so far in the series?
I really like it because I feel it walks us into Sal's headspace, which I really enjoyed. I love to see the triumph of Peggy with her idea, and she's now put a big crack down the wall. Maybe she's not one of the boys on the creative side, but creative is a lot closer to her reality and her world from this point forward than it ever was prior. And I also love the insights into Don's upbringing and why he may be such a cold fish or so problematic with his decisions and his mentality. As we're introduced to him in season one, it seems like he has everything anyone could ask for. He's successful at his job. He's got a beautiful wife, lovely children. Somehow that doesn't bring happiness. And that question of why doesn't it bring happiness and what would potentially bring him happiness, I think lingers as we look at the character.
I know a fair number of Mad Men fans who really like this episode, but it's not one of my favorites. I do appreciate the Sal storyline, and I really like seeing Peggy's professional success, but the characters are suffering just a string of disappointments, and they don't have so much in terms of wins or growth or humor. It feels like most of the characters backslide into the status quo of their lives. And this whole thing about Don's past as Dick Whitman seems very dark and kind of hard to take. In terms of an enjoyable episode with lots of quippy, funny, we're competing with each other, but in the end, how important is this petty thing? Here, characters are being cut in slices that don't ever heal. And that's kind of hard to experience as a viewer.
Man, why'd you have to say that? That's it for this episode of All Things Mad Men, from Chip and Dip to Zooby Zoo. Visit our website, madmenctozee.com, to vote for your favorite sterling lines and to share your opinions on our double dip questions for each episode.
You can find us on Instagram and YouTube at MadmenC2Z, and please listen, like, and subscribe. That's what the podcast's for.
Thanks for listening, everybody.